The massive station hung in space like a metal moon, its surface covered with lights that blinked in patterns known only to the most ancient races in the galaxy. Inside the central chamber, beings from 100 different worlds sat in a perfect circle, their voices echoing through the vast hall as they spoke of humanity. Representative Zixtila stood at the center of the circle, her 6 arms moving gracefully as she displayed holographic images above her head. The images showed human ships spreading across star systems, human colonies growing on planets that had been empty for thousands of years, and human faces looking up at alien skies with expressions of wonder and determination. "Look at what they have done in just 50 years, Zixtala said, her voice carrying the weight of ancient authority. "When we first discovered them, they had barely left their home world. Now they control 17 star systems and show no signs of slowing down." The other council members shifted in their seats, some making sounds of agreement, others remaining silent as they studied the images. Commander Velkaran, a being whose body seemed to be made of living metal, spoke next. "Their expansion rate exceeds all established patterns," he said, his words ringing like struck bells. "No species has ever spread this quickly while maintaining technological advancement. Most races either expand slowly and maintain stability, or expand quickly and collapse within a generation. But not humans," added another voice from across the circle. "They adapt to every new environment, learn from every mistake, and somehow manage to innovate faster as they spread further from their home." The images changed to show human technologies that had been captured or observed by Council. Scouts, weapons that use principles the Council had banned centuries ago, engines that somehow worked despite violating several fundamental laws of physics, and communication systems that operate on frequencies thought to be impossible to control. "They are dangerous," Zixtala continued. "Not because they are aggressive, though they can be when threatened. Not because they are numerous, though their population grows at an alarming rate. They are dangerous because they refuse to accept limitations, far away from the Council station." Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the New Horizon, watching stars through the massive viewing window. His ship was one of the newest in the human fleet, equipped with experimental technology that his engineers were still learning to understand. The crew moved efficiently around him, checking systems and monitoring space for any signs of alien activity. "Admiral," called Lisa Grant from her position at the science station, "I'm picking up some unusual energy readings from the outer rim." Jake turned toward her, his expression curious rather than concerned. In his years of exploring space, he had learned that unusual often meant interesting rather than dangerous. "What kind of energy readings?" he asked, walking over to look at her screens. "Unknown," Lisa replied, her fingers dancing across the controls as she tried to get a clearer picture. "The pattern doesn't match anything in our databases. It's almost like someone is charging up a massive weapon, but the energy signature is completely foreign." Jake studied the readings for a moment, then activated the ship's communication system. "This is Admiral Morrison to all stations. We have detected unknown energy patterns in our vicinity. All departments remain on standard alert while we investigate back on Earth." General Paul Carter was reviewing reports from the frontier worlds when his aide brought him disturbing news. Scout ships have been reporting strange alien activities along the edges of human space, and several colonies had detected powerful energy emissions from unknown sources. "Sir," the aide said, placing a data pad on Carter's desk. "The patterns are consistent across multiple systems. Whatever the aliens are doing, they're doing it on a large scale." Carter picked up the pad and scrolled through the reports. Each one described the same thing: massive energy buildups followed by periods of complete silence. It was as if someone was testing a weapon of incredible power on the Council station. The debate continued. Some members argue for diplomatic contact with humanity, suggesting that their rapid expansion might be controlled through negotiation and trade agreements. Others insisted that economic pressure would be enough to slow their growth, but Zixtala had a different solution in mind. She activated another set of holographic displays, these showing technical specifications for a device that made several council members lean back in their seats with expressions of shock and fear. The consciousness. Severance Ray, she announced. We have used it only 12 times in recorded galactic history, and each time it has solved the problem of an overly ambitious species permanently. The weapon shown in the holographs was unlike anything most of the council members had seen before. It operated on principles that reached into the very structure of consciousness itself, severing the connections between creativity, innovation, and independent thought. Species struck by the weapon became docile, accepting, and completely unable to develop new technologies or expand beyond their current borders. The weapon has never failed, Velcoran added, his metallic voice carrying a note of satisfaction. Every species that has threatened galactic stability has been neutralized through its use. They remain alive and capable of basic functions, but they lose all desire to grow, explore, or challenge the established order. Several council members began to object, arguing that using such a weapon against humanity would be excessive. But Zixthala cut them off with a gesture. We cannot afford to wait, she said firmly. Human expansion threatens not just our territorial agreements, but the very foundation of galactic civilization. They must be stopped before they spread further. The vote was called, and one by one, the council members gave their approval. Some voted reluctantly, others with obvious satisfaction, but the result was unanimous. The consciousness severance. Ray would be deployed against Humanity Valoran, took personal command of the targeting system, selecting Jake Morrison's ship as the primary target. In his experience, striking a high-ranking military officer usually convinced the rest of a species to surrender quickly and completely as the weapon began its charging sequence, generating power levels that could devastate entire planets. None of the council members suspected that they were about to make the greatest mistake in galactic history. The weapon fired across 3 light-years of empty space, invisible to every sensor and detection system known to galactic science. It moved faster than light itself, carrying exotic particles that had been charged with the power to rewrite the fundamental structure of consciousness. The beam traveled through asteroid fields and past distant suns, its path calculated with mathematical precision that took into account the movement of planets, the gravitational pull of black holes, and even the slight drift of cosmic dust. Jake Morrison was standing in the observation deck of the New Horizon when the beam struck him. He had come there to think, as he often did when faced with difficult decisions. The vast window showed him a view of stars that never failed to remind him how small and precious human life was in the endless darkness of space. The beam hit him without warning, without sound, without any sensation that he could identify. One moment he was looking out at the stars and thinking about the strange energy readings Lisa had detected. The next moment, every nerve in his body seemed to catch fire, and he collapsed to the deck as his vision filled with colors that had no names. Danny Wright was the first to reach him. The chief engineer had been passing through the corridor outside when he heard the sound of Jake hitting the floor. He rushed into the observation deck and found the Admiral unconscious, his body twitching slightly as if electricity was running through his muscles. Medical emergency in Observation Deck 7, Danny called into his communicator. Admiral Morrison is down and unresponsive. Dr. Helen Brooks arrived within minutes, followed by Amy Taylor and several other crew members who had heard the emergency call. Helen immediately began scanning Jake with her medical equipment, frowning. As the readings appeared on her screens, his vital signs are stable, she announced, though her voice carried confusion. Heart rate, blood pressure, brain activity, everything looks normal. But something is definitely happening to him. Amy knelt beside Jake's unconscious form, checking his pulse manually while Helen continued her scans. Should we move him to the medical bay? She asked. Not yet, Helen replied, watching her instruments with growing concern. These readings don't make sense. His brain is showing massive activity, but not in any pattern I've ever seen before. It's like his neurons are firing in completely new configurations. On the council station, Velkaran watched his monitors with satisfaction as they confirmed the weapon had struck its target successfully. The readings showed the characteristic energy dispersal pattern that indicated the consciousness severance. Ray had made contact with a living brain and begun its work, target acquired and struck. He reported to the assembled council. The weapon has made contact with the human designated as Admiral Jake Morrison. Neural restructuring should be complete within 6 hours. Zixtala studied the telemetry data streaming back from the weapon's targeting system. Everything appeared to be proceeding exactly as it had with the 12 previous species they had neutralized. The exotic particles were penetrating the target's brain, tissue, and beginning the process of severing the neural pathways responsible for creativity and independent thought. Excellent, she said. Monitor the target's vessel for signs of surrender. Once the Admiral realizes what has happened to him, he will have no choice but to accept our terms. Back on the New Horizon, Jake had been unconscious for 6 hours when the first signs of change became apparent. His body temperature had dropped by 2 degrees. His breathing had become deeper and more regular, and the strange neural activity that had confused Dr. Brooks was beginning to stabilize into new patterns. I've never seen anything like this, Helen told Danny as they stood over Jake's still form in the medical bay. His brain is reorganizing itself at the cellular level. New neural pathways are forming faster than I can track them, and the existing ones are strengthening in ways that should be impossible. Danny watched the monitors showing Jake's brain activity. The patterns looked almost like a computer program, rewriting itself, constantly changing and improving with each passing minute. Is he in any danger? He asked. I don't know, Helen admitted. All of his life signs are not just stable. They're actually improving. His heart is stronger than it was this morning. His reflexes are more efficient. Even his immune system seems to be operating at higher levels. But I have no idea what's causing these changes or what they mean. Amy Taylor had been monitoring communications from the bridge, hoping for some clue about what had happened to their admiral. The energy readings Lisa had detected earlier were gone now, leaving no trace of whatever had caused them. But something else was appearing on the long-range sensors. Dr. Brooks, Amy's voice came through the medical bay's communication system. You need to see this. Jake's brain isn't the only thing that's changing. Helen and Danny rushed to the bridge, where Lisa Grant was staring at her screens with an expression of complete bewilderment. The displays showed readings from throughout the ship, and every single system was operating more efficiently than its designers had thought possible. It started about an hour ago, Lisa explained. The ship's computer systems began optimizing themselves. The engines are running at 112% efficiency. The life support systems are using 30% less power while providing better air quality and the navigation. Computer has somehow improved its accuracy by a factor of 10. That's impossible, Danny said, studying the engineering readouts. Those systems can't modify themselves. They don't have that kind of adaptive programming. They do now, Lisa replied. And it's not just the computer systems. The quantum resonance chambers are operating in harmony patterns that our best engineers said were theoretical impossibilities. Whatever happened to the Admiral, it's affecting the entire ship in the medical bay. Jake's body continued its transformation. His muscles became more dense without becoming larger. His bones strengthened while somehow becoming lighter. And his nervous system developed new connections that allow information to travel at speeds that defied medical understanding. Helen returned to check on him and found something that made her step back in surprise. Jake's eyes were open, but they weren't focused on anything in the room. Instead, they seemed to be looking at something far beyond the walls of the ship, something that existed in dimensions she couldn't imagine. Jake, she said softly, can you hear me? He didn't respond, but his lips moved slightly, forming words too quiet to understand. Helen activated the medical bay's recording system and increased the sensitivity of the audio pickups. The words that came through the speakers made her blood run cold. Jake was speaking in mathematical equations, but not in any mathematical language that existed in human knowledge. The formulas he whispered described principles of physics that human science had barely begun to theorize about, solutions to problems that the greatest minds on Earth had spent decades trying to solve on the council station. Vel'Koran was beginning to notice that something was wrong. The weapon's telemetry continued to show successful contact with the target, but the expected neural shutdown wasn't occurring. Instead, the reading suggested that the target's brain activity was increasing rather than decreasing. Run a diagnostic. On the weapon systems, he ordered his technicians. Something isn't proceeding according to plan. The diagnostic came back clean. Every component of the consciousness severance ray was functioning perfectly, delivering exactly the right type and amount of exotic particles to sever the neural pathways responsible for higher thought. But somehow, instead of destroying those pathways, the weapon seemed to be strengthening them for the first time in his long career. Vel'Koran began to wonder if they had made a terrible mistake. Jake opened his eyes after 8 hours of unconsciousness, but the world he saw was completely different from the one he remembered. Every surface in the medical bay seemed to glow with patterns of energy that moved and shifted like living things. The walls themselves appeared transparent, showing him the complex networks of power conduits and data cables that ran through the ship's structure. Even more amazing, he could see the flow of electricity through those cables as streams of light that pulsed in rhythm with the ship's heartbeat. Dr. Helen Brooks was sitting beside his bed when he awakened, and her face showed relief mixed with deep concern. She had been monitoring his condition throughout the night, watching as his brain continued to reorganize itself in ways that challenged everything she thought she knew about human biology. Jake, she said softly, leaning forward to check his pupils with a small light. How do you feel? Different, Jake replied, though that word seemed completely inadequate to describe what had happened to him. His voice sounded the same, but his awareness of everything around him had expanded beyond anything he could have imagined. He could hear conversations taking place 3 decks below, feel the vibrations of the ship's engines as if they were part of his own body, and somehow sense the location of every crew member aboard the New Horizon. Your brain scans show massive changes, Helen told him, activating a holographic display that showed the structure of his neural networks. New pathways have formed throughout your entire nervous system, and the existing ones have been strengthened by several orders of magnitude. I've never seen anything like it. Jake sat up slowly, marveling at how perfectly his body responded to his commands. Every muscle seemed to know exactly what he wanted before he fully formed the thought, and his balance was so precise that he felt as if he could walk on a tightrope in a hurricane. I can see the quantum fluctuations in the air, he said, watching tiny sparks of energy that appeared and disappeared throughout the room. And I understand why they happen. The uncertainty principle isn't a limitation of measurement. It's a fundamental feature of reality that allows consciousness to influence physical events. Helen stared at him with growing alarm. Jake, quantum mechanics is one of the most complex fields in physics. You're talking about it like you invented it. Maybe I did, Jake replied, though he wasn't sure what he meant by that. The knowledge in his head didn't feel like something he had learned, but rather like something he had always known and was just now remembering. Helen, I need to see Lisa Grant. There are things about faster-than-light travel that she needs to understand. When Lisa arrived in the medical bay 20 minutes later, she found Jake sketching diagrams on a digital tablet with incredible speed and precision. The drawings showed engine designs that were unlike anything in human technology, but somehow she could see immediately how they would work. These equations, Lisa said, studying the formulas Jake had written beside his sketches. They solved the energy requirements problem that's been limiting our faster-than-light drives. But how did you know that the quantum foam could be stabilized using harmonic resonance? I can see it, Jake replied simply. The space around us isn't empty. It's full of energy patterns that we've been ignoring because we didn't know how to perceive them. But they're there. And they want to be used. Danny Wright joined them a few minutes later, carrying a tablet full of engineering problems that had been plaguing the New Horizon for months. He had heard rumors that something extraordinary was happening with the Admiral, and he hoped that whatever had changed Jake might help him solve some persistent technical issues. Admiral, Danny said, showing Jake a schematic of the ship's power distribution system. We've been having trouble with energy fluctuations in the port engine assembly. The problem occurs randomly, and we can't figure out what's causing it. Jake glanced at the schematic for less than 5 seconds, then began drawing modifications on Danny's tablet. His fingers moved so quickly that they seemed to blur, but every line he drew was perfectly precise. The fluctuations are caused by quantum interference between the primary power coupling and the backup systems, Jake explained as he worked. The solution is to install a phase shift buffer here, here, and here. The buffer will use the interference patterns to actually increase engine efficiency by about 15%. Danny stared at the modifications Jake had drawn. The design was elegant, simple, and completely brilliant. More importantly, he could see exactly how to build it using components they already had aboard the ship. This is incredible, Danny said. These modifications will solve not just the power fluctuation problem, but also the heat buildup issues we've been having with the environmental systems. As word of Jake's transformation spread through the ship, more crew members began arriving at the medical bay with questions and problems they hoped he could solve. Each time, Jake provided solutions that were both practical and revolutionary, often suggesting improvements to systems that everyone had assumed were already operating at peak efficiency. Meanwhile, on the council station, Velcoran was growing, increasingly disturbed by the readings coming from his weapons monitoring systems. Instead of the expected neural shutdown, the target was showing brain activity levels that exceeded anything in the galactic database. Run a complete analysis of the target species, he ordered his technicians. There must be something unique about human neural architecture that we didn't account for. The analysis took several hours to complete, and when the results appeared on Velcoran's screens, he felt something very much like fear for the first time in centuries. Human brains, according to the data, were structured completely differently from every other known species in the galaxy. Most intelligent species had evolved neural networks that operated in linear, predictable patterns. Their thoughts followed logical pathways from problem to solution, and their creativity was limited by the physical constraints of their brain structure. But human brains were different. They used chaos as a tool, allowing random neural firings to create unexpected connections between seemingly unrelated concepts. The weapon was designed to sever the pathways responsible for innovation and creativity, one of his technicians reported. But human creativity doesn't use dedicated pathways. It emerges from the interaction between all of their neural networks simultaneously, which means, Velcoran said slowly, beginning to understand the magnitude of their mistake, that instead of severing those pathways, our weapon has enhanced them. Back on the New Horizon, Jake was beginning to experience something even more extraordinary than his enhanced intelligence. As he worked on solving the technical problems his crew brought to him, he started seeing flashes of images that didn't come from his own memory. He saw vast cities built by species he had never encountered, technologies that operated on principles human science hadn't discovered, and most disturbing of all, the moment when each of those civilizations had suddenly stopped innovating and advancing. In every case, the end came not through war or natural disaster, but through a mysterious loss of creativity that left entire species capable of maintaining their existing technology, but unable to develop anything new. Lisa, Jake called to his science officer, who was still studying the engine modifications he had designed. Have you ever heard of a species called the Melodians? Lisa shook her head. No, why? I'm seeing images of their civilization, Jake replied, closing his eyes, to focus on the visions that were becoming clearer with each passing moment. They were artists and musicians who built cities that were themselves works of art. But about 10,000 years ago, they stopped creating new music and began endlessly repeating the same compositions over and over again. That sounds like some kind of cultural stagnation, Lisa suggested. Maybe they reached a creative peak and couldn't surpass it. No, Jake said, opening his eyes and looking directly at her. They were forced to stop. Someone or something took away their ability to create new things, and they've been trapped. In that state ever since, the visions were coming faster now, showing him dozens of species across the galaxy that had suffered the same fate. Each one had been thriving and innovative until a specific moment when their creativity simply disappeared. And in every case, that moment had been preceded by the same type of energy readings that Lisa had detected just before Jake was struck. "Council," Jake whispered, the knowledge flowing into his mind like water into a dry riverbed. "They've been using a weapon to control galactic civilization for thousands of years. They destroy the ability to innovate in any species that threatens their power. But why didn't it work on you?" Lisa asked. Jake smiled, and for the first time since his transformation, the expression looked entirely human. "Because they didn't understand what makes humans different. We don't just think our way to new ideas. We feel our way to them. Our creativity comes from the connection between logic and emotion, between order and chaos. When they tried to sever those connections, they made them stronger instead." As Jake spoke, the New Horizon began broadcasting complex mathematical proofs across subspace frequencies, transmitting solutions to fundamental problems in physics that had stumped galactic civilization for millennia. And for the first time in 10,000 years, the mathematical proofs that Jake broadcast from the New Horizon reached Earth 17 hours later, traveling through the network of communication relays that connected human space. Dr. Kevin Ross was working late in his laboratory at the Mars Science Institute when the transmissions appeared on his screens. And what he saw made him forget about sleep entirely. The equations were beautiful in their simplicity, solving problems that had frustrated physicists for decades with elegant solutions that seemed obvious once you saw them. But more than that, they opened doorways to entirely new fields of science that human researchers had never even imagined. "Nancy," Kevin called to his colleague Dr. Nancy Phillips, who was working in the laboratory next door. "You need to see this immediately," Nancy arrived to find Kevin staring at his screens with an expression of wonder and disbelief. The formulas displayed their described methods for manipulating gravity at the molecular level, techniques for converting matter directly into energy with perfect efficiency, and principles for faster-than-light communication that didn't require any physical transmission medium. "Where did these come from?" Nancy asked, scanning through the equations with growing amazement. "Admiral Morrison's ship," Kevin replied. "According to the transmission headers, he personally derived all these solutions." "But Nancy, some of these formulas describe technologies that are centuries ahead of anything we've developed. How could one person have figured all of this out?" The answer to that question was spreading across human space as more scientists and engineers examined Jake's broadcasts. Each discovery led to 10 more questions, and somehow Jake already knew the answers to all of them. Within days, research stations throughout human territory were receiving detailed explanations of advanced technologies that revolutionized everything from medical treatment to food production on Mars. Engineer Tony Martinez was the first person to successfully build a working prototype based on Jake's new propulsion designs. The device was small, no larger than a briefcase, but when he activated it, the entire laboratory was filled with a humming energy that seemed to make the air itself vibrate with potential impossible. Tony whispered as he watched his instruments register the device's performance. The prototype was generating thrust levels that should have required a fusion reactor, but it was drawing power from the quantum foam of empty space itself. "This thing is producing more energy than we're putting into it." The implications were staggering. If Jake's designs could be scaled up to ship size, human vessels would be able to travel at speeds that made even the most advanced alien technologies look primitive. More importantly, they would be completely independent of fuel supplies, drawing their energy from the fundamental structure of reality itself. As news of these breakthroughs spread, General Paul Carter found himself dealing with questions from every government and military. organization on Earth, the alien energy readings that had worried him before seemed insignificant compared to the possibility that humanity had somehow leaped centuries ahead in technological development overnight. "Sir," his aide reported during their morning briefing, "we're receiving requests for information from every major power on Earth. They all want to know how Admiral Morrison developed these technologies and whether we're planning to share them." Carter studied the reports coming in from the frontier worlds, where human colonies were already beginning to implement Jake's discoveries. Agricultural yields were increasing dramatically thanks to new growing techniques that manipulated plant genetics. At the quantum level, medical facilities were treating diseases that had been considered incurable using therapies based on cellular regeneration principles that Jake had somehow derived from first principles. "Tell them we're still analyzing the situation," Carter replied, "but make it clear that these discoveries belong to all of humanity, not just to any single government or organization." Meanwhile, Jake's enhanced consciousness was continuing to expand, showing him not just the solutions to scientific problems, but the historical context that explained why those problems existed in the first place. He could see the moment when each species in the galaxy had first developed a theoretical framework for faster-than-light travel, and he could see the exact instant when their research had stopped progressing. They'd been controlling galactic development for thousands of years. Jake explained to his senior staff during a briefing in the New Horizons conference room. Every time a species gets close to developing technologies that might threaten the Council's power, they deploy their weapon and reduce that species to a state of permanent technological stagnation. Lisa Grant had been analyzing the historical data that Jake's visions provided, cross-referencing it with the fragmentary records that human explorers had found on abandoned worlds throughout their expansion. The pattern was consistent across dozens of civilizations. "The archaeological evidence supports everything you're seeing," she reported. "We found ruins of cities that were clearly built by advanced civilizations, but the newest structures in those cities are always thousands of years old. It's as if every species in the galaxy reached a certain level of development and then just stopped." "Not stopped," Jake corrected. "They were stopped. The Council's weapon doesn't kill its targets or destroy their existing knowledge. It simply makes them incapable of having new ideas or developing new technologies. They become maintenance crews for their own civilizations, keeping everything running, but never improving anything." Danny Wright had been studying the technical specifications that Jake provided about the Council's weapon, trying to understand how it worked and whether there might be a way to defend against it. What he discovered was both encouraging and terrifying. The weapon operates by introducing exotic particles into the target's neural networks, Danny reported. "These particles are designed to interrupt the quantum processes that allow consciousness to influence physical reality." "But Jake, the energy requirements for this weapon are enormous. They would need to tap into the power output of an entire star system to charge it, which means they can't use it casually," Jake realized. "Every time they deploy it, they have to make massive preparations and commit enormous resources. That's why they've been able to control the galaxy for so long. Most species never realize they're under attack until it's too late, but Jake's transformation had given him something that no other species possessed: the ability to perceive the weapon's effects and understand how it worked. More importantly, he was beginning to develop countermeasures. "I think I can reverse what they've done," he announced to his staff. "The exotic particles they use to disrupt neural networks can be neutralized using targeted electromagnetic fields. If we can generate the right frequency patterns, we should be able to restore normal brain function to any species that's been affected by their weapon." The implications of this discovery sent shockwaves through the Council's monitoring stations. For the first time in their recorded history, they were facing an opponent who not only understood their primary weapon, but claimed to have developed a way to neutralize its FX6 file, called an emergency session of the full Council, gathering representatives from every member species to address the crisis that was unfolding in human space. "The target has not only survived the weapon's effects," she reported to the assembled delegates, but appears to have been enhanced by them. More disturbing, he is now broadcasting information that could destabilize our entire system of galactic control. The holographic displays showed the mathematical proof that Jake had transmitted, along with analysis of their potential impact on galactic civilization. If other species gain access to these technologies, the balance of power that had maintained peace for millennia would be completely overthrown. We must deploy additional weapons, Vel'Koran insisted. If one human can survive the consciousness severance ray, we will use a dozen rays simultaneously. No organic mind can withstand that level of neural disruption. But even as he spoke, Vel'Koran knew that their advantage was slipping away. For the first time in thousands of years, the Council faced an opponent who understood their methods and possessed the knowledge necessary to fight back. The galaxy was about to change in ways that none of them could control. Jake stood in the New Horizons main laboratory, surrounded by equipment that hummed with energies his crew was still learning to understand. His enhanced consciousness allowed him to perceive the quantum structures underlying reality itself, and what he saw there gave him hope that the Council's ancient weapon could not only be defeated but reverse Steve. He called the programmer Steve Johnson, who was working at a computer terminal nearby. I need you to write a program that can generate specific electromagnetic frequency patterns. The calculations are complex, but I can see the mathematical relationships that make it possible. Steve looked up from his screen, his expression showing the same mixture of excitement and bewilderment that had become common among the crew since Jake's transformation. What kind of frequency patterns, Admiral? The kind that can repair 10,000 years of neural damage, Jake replied, beginning to sketch diagrams on a large display screen. The Council's weapon works by introducing exotic particles that disrupt the quantum processes in consciousness. But those particles have a specific resonance frequency, and if we can generate an opposing frequency, we can neutralize them completely. Dr. Carol White, the ship's physicist, studied Jake's diagrams with growing amazement. The mathematics involved were incredibly sophisticated, describing principles of quantum mechanics that human science was only beginning to explore. But somehow, Jake made it all seem as simple as basic arithmetic. These equations suggest that consciousness itself operates on quantum principles, Carol said, tracing some of Jake's formulas with her finger. You're treating thoughts and emotions as measurable quantum states that can be influenced by external electromagnetic fields, because that's exactly what they are, Jake confirmed. Consciousness isn't just an emergent property of complex neural networks. It's a fundamental force of the universe, like gravity or electromagnetism. The Council discovered this principle thousands of years ago and learned how to weaponize it, working with incredible speed and precision. Jake's team began constructing the first consciousness restoration device. The machine was surprisingly small, no larger than a medical scanner, but the energy patterns it generated were unlike anything human technology had ever produced. We need to test this on a species that's been affected by the Council's weapon, Jake announced when the device was complete. According to my visions, there's an archaeological site on Kepler-7 where we can find subjects who were struck by the weapon about 5,000 years ago. The New Horizon changed course immediately, heading for the Kepler system at speeds that would have been impossible before Jake's technological breakthroughs. The ship's new engines drew power from the quantum foam of space itself, allowing them to travel faster than light without the massive energy requirements that had previously limited human exploration. When they reached Kepler-7, they found ruins that stretched across an entire continent. The cities were magnificent, built from materials that seemed to shift color in the changing light, but they were completely empty of life. Archaeological surveys had found the remains of a species called the Keplerians, but no one had ever been able to explain why such an advanced civilization had simply vanished. They didn't vanish, Jake said as he studied the ruins through the ship's sensors. They're still here, but they're not really alive anymore. The away team that landed on Kepler-7 found the Keplerians in vast underground complexes, tending to machines that had been running continuously for millennia. The beings were tall, and graceful, with 4 arms and skin that showed traces of the same color-shifting properties as their cities. But their eyes were empty, showing no curiosity or awareness of the humans who had suddenly appeared among them. They're maintaining their technology perfectly, reported the away team leader. Every system is operating at peak efficiency. But when we try to communicate with them, they don't respond. It's like they don't even recognize that we're here. Jake activated the consciousness restoration device from orbit, generating electromagnetic fields that penetrated the planet's surface and reached into the underground complexes where the Keplerians lived. The results were immediate and dramatic. The first Keplerian to be affected by the restoration field suddenly looked up from the machine he had been tending for countless centuries, his eyes focusing with an awareness that hadn't been there moments before. He looked around in confusion, then began to speak in a musical language that the ship's computers quickly translated. "Where am I?" the Keplerian asked. "What happened to the sky? Why can't I remember anything after the day the stars went dark?" Within hours, thousands of Keplerians were awakening from their millennia-long stupor, their natural creativity and curiosity restored by Jake's device. They remembered their history, their culture, and most importantly, they remembered the moment when the Council's weapon had struck their world and robbed them of their ability to think new thoughts. News of this success spread rapidly through human space and beyond. Species that had been under Council control for thousands of years began to hear rumors that their ancient creativity could be restored, and many of them started sending secret messages to human territories, begging for help. Dr. Carol White worked with the awakened Keplerians to refine the consciousness restoration technology, learning how to adapt it for different species and different types of neural damage. Each success brought new allies to humanity's cause and new technologies that made their fleet more powerful. Admiral, reported Communications Officer Amy Taylor. "We're receiving messages from 47 different species requesting consciousness restoration. Some of them are offering to share technologies that predate the Council's control by thousands of years." Jake smiled as he reviewed the messages. Each one represented a civilization that had been frozen in time by the Council's weapon, but which still possessed knowledge and capabilities that could contribute to the growing rebellion against galactic tyranny. "Send responses to all of them," Jake ordered. "Tell them that freedom is coming, and that soon they'll be able to dream new dreams again." The first joint human-alien fleet was assembled under the command of Captain Rick Adams, who had volunteered to lead the most dangerous mission in human history. His ships were equipped with technologies that combined human innovation with the ancient knowledge of liberated species, creating weapons and defenses that the Council had never encountered before. "The beauty of this technology," Rick explained to his officers as they prepared for their first engagement with Council forces, "is that it continues to evolve. Every time we use it, it learns and adapts, becoming more effective against whatever we're fighting." When the Council fleet arrived to crush the rebellion, they found themselves facing opponents who fought with tactics that changed faster than they could adapt. Human ships equipped with Keplerian arc-based camouflage systems became invisible to Council sensors, while weapons that operated on principles derived from dozens of different species overwhelmed their defenses with attacks. They had no way to counter. Valkyran watched his forces suffer their first major defeat in recorded galactic history, and he knew that everything the Council had built over thousands of years was beginning to crumble. "The humans have turned our own weapon against us," he reported to the emergency Council session. "Every species we liberated becomes an ally in their rebellion, and their technology advances faster than we can analyze it. Then we must strike at the source," Zixtala declared. "Concentrate all remaining forces and destroy the human homeworld. Without their base of operations, their rebellion will collapse." But even as she gave the order, Zixtala knew that it might already be too late. The galaxy was waking up from a 10,000-year sleep, and the dreams that had been suppressed for so long were finally beginning to bloom again. The Council's final assault fleet was the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history, containing ships from every member species and weapons that drew power from the cores of dying stars. Vel-Karan personally commanded the flagship, a vessel so massive that its gravitational field distorted space around it, creating ripples that could be detected from several light years away. But when the fleet arrived at the coordinates where they expected to find Earth's solar system, they discovered something that made even Vel-Karan's artificial heart skip several beats. The entire system had been transformed into a fortress that spanned billions of miles, with defensive platforms that used principles of physics the Council had never encountered. "This is impossible," Vel-Karan muttered as his sensors tried to make sense of what they were seeing. No species has ever been able to manipulate space-time on this scale. The energy requirements alone should have burned out their home star. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his new flagship, a vessel that had been grown rather than built using technologies that combine human engineering with the living metal techniques of the liberated Keplerians. Around him, officers from dozens of different species worked together with an efficiency that would have been impossible under the Council's rigid hierarchical system. Admiral reported his new science officer, a Keplerian named Harmonious Court of Seven Worlds. "The Council fleet is attempting to charge their main weapons. Should we activate the dimensional displacement field?" "Not yet," Jake replied, his enhanced consciousness allowing him to perceive the quantum probabilities surrounding the approaching battle. "Let them think they have the advantage for a few more minutes. I want to give Vel-Karan a chance to understand what he's really fighting." The understanding came when the Council fleet fired their opening salvo, unleashing enough destructive energy to sterilize entire worlds. The weapon struck Earth's defensive platforms and simply vanished, absorbed by fields that converted destructive force into harmless light patterns that painted beautiful colors across the solar system's asteroid belt. "Energy conversion on a stellar scale," whispered one of Vel-Karan's technicians. "They're not just deflecting our weapons. They're transforming them into art." Jake activated his ship's communication system, broadcasting a message directly to Vel-Karan's flagship. When the Council commander's image appeared on the screen, Jake could see the fear and confusion in his artificial eyes. "Commander Vel-Karan," Jake said calmly, "you've spent thousands of years suppressing creativity and innovation throughout the galaxy. Today, you're going to see what happens when that creativity is finally set free." The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Instead of simply trying to destroy the Council fleet, Jake's forces demonstrated technologies that seemed to operate according to entirely new laws of physics. Ships that could exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, weapons that turned aggression into music, and defensive systems that protected their enemies as well as themselves. "We're not here to destroy you," Jake broadcast to all Council ships as his forces systematically disabled their weapons without harming their crews. "We're here to offer you the same choice we've given every other species in the galaxy. Accept consciousness restoration and join the new galactic community, or continue to exist in the limited state you've imposed on yourselves." One by one, Council ships began to surrender as their crews realized that they were facing an opponent who was more interested in liberation than conquest. When Vel-Karan's flagship was finally surrounded by vessels from 47 different species, all working together with perfect coordination, he knew that the old order was truly finished. "How?" Vel-Karan asked when Jake transported directly onto his bridge, appearing in a shimmer of quantum probability that bypassed every security system the flagship possessed. "How did you survive our weapon when no other species ever has?" Jake smiled, and for the first time since his transformation, the expression carried traces of the simple human emotion that had started everything. "Because you never understood what makes consciousness work. You thought creativity was a weakness that could be eliminated, but it's actually the most powerful force in the universe. When you tried to destroy it in humanity, you accidentally made it stronger." The formal surrender of the Council took place on their ancient station, in the same chamber where they had voted to deploy the consciousness severance ray against humanity. Representatives from every liberated species gathered to witness the moment when 10,000 years of tyranny finally came to an end. The last of the original council members still capable of independent thought stood before the assembled, delegates with her 6 arms hanging limply at her sides. The weight of her species' crimes against galactic civilization seemed to press down on her like a physical force. "We believe we were maintaining order," she said, her voice barely audible in the vast chamber. "We thought that by limiting the capacity for change, we could prevent the wars and conflicts that had torn the galaxy apart in ancient times. But you also prevented growth, discovery, and the joy of creating something new," Jake replied. "Peace through stagnation isn't really peace at all. It's just a very slow form of death. The establishment of the new Galactic Assembly took months of careful negotiation, as species that had been suppressed for millennia learned how to participate in democratic decision-making again." Jake found himself serving as a mediator between civilizations that had forgotten how to dream, helping them rediscover the possibilities that had been stolen from them. The Keplerians contributed their mastery of living architecture, designing space stations that grew and adapted to the needs of their inhabitants. The Melodians, awakened after 10,000 years of creative silence, filled the galaxy with new forms of music that incorporated mathematical principles no one had imagined before. Dozens of other species added their own unique perspectives to the growing renaissance of galactic civilization. The most remarkable thing, Dr. Helen Brooks observed as she studied the ongoing changes in Jake's enhanced consciousness, is that your transformation seems to be stabilizing. The neural patterns that were chaotic in the first few weeks are settling into configurations that appear to be sustainable long-term. Jake nodded, looking out through the observation window of the new Galactic Assembly's headquarters at the ships, from 100 different worlds that filled the space around them. His enhanced abilities remained far beyond normal human capabilities, but he had learned to use them responsibly, always remembering that power without wisdom led to the same kind of tyranny the Council had imposed. "I've been having dreams," he told Helen. "Visions of other humans who might undergo similar transformations in the future. The Council's weapon created a new evolutionary pathway, and I don't think I'm going to be the only one who follows it. The implications of this possibility excited and terrified scientists throughout human space. If more humans could develop the kind of enhanced consciousness that Jake possessed, humanity might become something entirely new, a species capable of perceiving and manipulating reality in ways that had never been possible before. But for now, Jake was content to help build the new galactic civilization that was emerging from the ashes of the Council's ancient tyranny. Species that had been enemies for thousands of years were learning to work together, sharing knowledge and resources in ways that benefited everyone. The weapon that was supposed to end humanity's threat to galactic order had instead created the very force that would transform the galaxy into something better than it had ever been before. And as Jake watched ships from dozens of worlds working together to build a future none of them could have imagined alone, he knew that the greatest adventures were still waiting to be discovered. The Council's greatest weapon hadn't just backfired. It had given birth to a new age of exploration, creativity, and cooperation that would reshape the galaxy for generations to come. And it all started because they had underestimated the most dangerous force in the universe, a human being who refused to accept limitations.